Hi, welcome to On Air. I'm Klara Syrewicz. 3 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the glimmer of a ceasefire or even a fragile peace got everyone racing to anticipate what comes next. Today we're looking at Russia's prospects in peacetime and what they could mean for the rest of us. Last month, EU leaders met in Copenhagen to brace for Russia's growing threats, from hybrid warfare to a possible military strike on European soil. But of course, they barely touched on the threats Russia will pose after the war, even to itself. At the UN General Assembly, Trump called Russia a paper tiger, paraphrasing Mao Zedong, probably meaning to emphasize that Moscow was in serious economic trouble. According to him, Ukraine could soon reclaim all its territory while Russia teeters on the brink of a precipice. So is that accurate? As usual with Trump, reality is a bit more complicated. Russia faces an array of wartime problems, though it has proved far more resilient than many anticipated. Still, that resilience has its limits. The same forces keeping it afloat are quietly rotting its foundations and stability. As we've seen in a previous episode, wartime economies often fuel sanctions circumventing networks and kleptocracy, especially when, as in Russia's case, organized crime becomes an extension of the state. These tendencies can solidify into a post-war shadow economy that will undermine the rule of law, foreign investment and social stability. In today's mobilization state, the rule of law is effectively gone. Private assets can be requisitioned at will for the war effort. What's left of foreign investment mostly turns Russia into a colony of Chinese capital. And we've already seen how risky that is. Socially, payments to soldiers and families will shrink once the frontline meat grinder stops churning, removing one of the few current social stabilizers. In short, when the guns fall silent, Russia could face a criminal revolution fueled by battle-hardened veterans, excess weapons and gang-related corruption. The warning signs are already here. If up to 9 million Ukrainian veterans face an uncertain future in terms of employment, trauma and reintegration, Russia's challenge is even steeper. Its massive recruitment of convicts means thousands will soon walk free. This may have seismic consequences for Russian society, eclipsing even the violent fallout of the Soviet-Afghan war. Millions of returning Afghans brought home combat skills and trauma to a society unprepared to absorb them. Many entered criminal networks as the chaotic market reforms of the 90s turned competition into a blood sport. By 1993, criminal violence claimed more lives than the Afghan war itself, while security services became key actors or enablers of organized crime. The wartime machinery of bribery and smuggling evolved into a global arms and narcotics trade, producing figures like Putin's associate Viktor Bout, who profited from the flood of surplus Soviet weapons. But heroin was the real prize of the Afghan war. A steady stream of opium flowed in aboard military planes, and even today, Russia ranks among the world's biggest heroin markets. One Russian official admitted the trade has created a twin epidemic, addiction and HIV. Before the Ukraine invasion, up to 6 million Russians were hooked, with the drug death rates nearly triple Britain's. Right now, drug use among soldiers has reached an all-time high, so many will return from the front battling not just trauma, but addiction. The containment of the 90s crime wave and the relative stability brought by Putin's government in his first term are being deconstructed by the man himself. Widespread access to arms will only exacerbate the problem. Serbia offers a cautionary parallel. Decades after the Yugoslav war, illegal weapons remain abundant. The first major disarmament drive began only in 2023, following 2 mass shootings that left 17 dead, many of them children. It yielded 6,000 surrendered firearms in just 3 days. 2 decades on, Serbia continues to bear the war's legacy. Violence against women during and after the war remains largely unacknowledged, and the Council of Europe reports its widespread nature. It scares me to think what awaits many women and children in Russia once the soldiers return home. Now, the next question is, will any of them at least have a source of income? This is a tricky question since numerous analyses point to a Russian job market gasping for employees. Currently, able-bodied men are being heavily recruited, coerced, or even deceived into fighting, a testament to the desperation that powers the war machine. For instance, Chechen warlord Ramzan Kadyrov boasts of sending tens of thousands to Ukraine. In truth, his security officers force men into service through fake terrorism charges, kidnappings, threats against family relatives, and even honey traps. Sky-high soldier wages reflect the difficulty of recruitment, while defense industry paychecks are also up as expanding factories gobble up available workers. Meanwhile, the civilian sectors, agriculture, railways, logistics, must also increase wages to retain staff. So this self-cannibalizing cycle is already draining the state and Russian businesses, even if it has, for now, improved individual revenues. A truce is unlikely to curb Russian defense spending immediately because the overbuilt industry must continue production for a few years to prevent economic collapse. But hundreds of civilian enterprises, from food to electronics to uniform production, rely on military contracts. A halt would bring painful contractions or bankruptcies. So once defense contracts disappear, labour will drain from both civilian firms and the slowing military sector, producing stagnant wages amid consumer inflation eroding real incomes. So right now is the only good time to find work, because Russia's war-driven economy isn't ready for peace. The war is devouring reserves, inflating the deficit and pushing a recession. To get an idea of the true state of the Russian economy, the 2026 budget bill currently before the Duma is a good indicator. While not as catastrophic as Trump suggests, the country is entering its most challenging period since the start of the aggression. The defense-driven boom is over. For the first time in 4 years, defense spending is being cut, though still a massive 8% of GDP. Growth has plunged from 4.3% in 2024 to an estimated 1% in 2025. Fossil fuel revenues are falling, and the budget deficit is forcing Putin to raise taxes. Even if a political truce is doubtful, most economists agree that continuing the war is financially unwise for Russia. So what if it hits pause? Could the economy recover enough in a few years to fuel another offensive? The answer hinges on which sanctions are eased, but expect much caution. Even a peace deal won't bring a full reset. History shows post-war recovery rarely succeeds if peace is unstable. A quick rebound is not likely to happen. Wars impose decades of spending on veterans and military debt repayments. And even if GDP recovers, scars on labour and capital remain. In Russia, the deepest scar of all is demographic. In the 1980s Polish comedy Sex Mission, 2 cryogenically frozen male scientists awaken to a world without men. The not at all funny reality in current Russia is that of a looming shortage of men, particularly those who are skilled, physically healthy and psychologically stable. Confirmed counts put Russian military deaths at just over 107,000 at the start of this year. Demographer Alexei Raksha suggests the real number could be 2 to 2.5 times higher. Before the war, Russia already faced long-term demographic decline, with low fertility and the male life expectancy substantially shorter than in Western countries. The war has made it far worse. By 2030, Russia may be short of at least 2.4 million workers. Russia's fragile population pyramid already leans heavily on immigration to prop up its workforce and increasingly on child labour and modern slave labour from African recruits baited into defence factories under the pretense of work-study programmes. Skilled workers are the hardest to replace. Hundreds of thousands fled after the invasion, many of them young, educated and technically trained. Economic stagnation and mounting family losses will only reinforce that exodus. Even if some were to return, which is doubtful under an ever more repressive regime, the damage to productivity, innovation and human capital is already done. So the next question is, who will pay through taxes for veterans' benefits, healthcare and pensions? After the war, Russia will also find itself more isolated, with many of its geopolitical goals squandered. The ultimate irony is that the invasion breathed new life into both NATO and the EU, institutions Moscow sought to weaken. NATO expanded to Sweden and Finland and ramped up military coordination. The EU went even further, pooling financial resources, creating mechanisms to arm Ukraine, coordinating energy policy and granting unprecedented protections to millions of Ukrainian refugees. Moscow even managed to throw the UK back into Europe's orbit, despite all the hard work it had invested into pushing the Brexit vote. Fossil fuel exports, once Moscow's trump card and main source of revenue, now rest on shaky ground. Sanctions and the West's shift away from Russian energy have eroded the main pillar of Russia's influence in Europe. Meanwhile, Ukraine's wartime resilience has translated into a newfound global standing. Only 4 months into the invasion, it secured EU candidate status, a process that had stalled since 2008. Inside Ukraine, the war has done what decades of politics couldn't. It forged a stronger sense of national identity. The notion that Ukraine could ever revert to being a Russian satellite, flooded by Moscow's language or culture, has become unrealistic. Rebuilding after wars takes investment, imports and trade partners. Russia's running short on all three. Though it's leaning on China, India, Iran and a few African states, those ties are often asymmetrical and insufficient to replace Western technology, markets and capital. At the same time, frozen Russian assets in Europe are expected to serve as collateral for Ukrainian reparations, imposing a long diplomatic aftertaste. If 9 years in Afghanistan brewed decades of chaos, this war is shaping a whole new world for Russia. It's been thrust into an Iranian scenario, that of an isolated, corrupt and malignant regional force projecting power by destabilizing the countries it aims to control. Domestically, reckoning with the war's legacy will be even tougher. Hundreds of thousands of Russian officials and security personnel have been involved in atrocities, and their accountability is under investigation in international criminal proceedings. But any substantive punishment may only follow a radical power shift in Moscow. In this very rosy scenario, difficult to believe given Russia's historical reluctance to confront its past, a new crop of skilled and West-facing technocrats would take over the country, navigating security services fused with organized crime, kleptocratic billionaires skilled at managing those very networks, a traumatized and heavily armed population, and an overblown army with generals keenly eyeing a potential power grab. Wow, good luck. Putin turned 73 this Tuesday. We shouldn't wish anyone ill, but boy, you know what I have in mind. The real question is what comes next. Michael Clark noted on Sky News that past Russian leadership changes brought a 2-3-year interregnum. Whoever emerges is unlikely to share Putin's obsession with this war. It is, after all, a personal megalomaniac projection of his place in history. Let's hope we can end it before he is finished. And then, well, a whole new set of problems will arise. If only decision makers could directly experience the war's costs. Thank you for watching and see you next week.